The hushed stillness of Mrs. Jenkins's fifth-grade math class in Millwood Elementary was rarely broken by anything more exciting than the rhythmic scratching of pencils or the occasional frustrated sigh. For most students, it was a purgatory of numbers and equations, a slow march towards the bell. But for Alara Vance, a wisp of a girl with hair the color of warm mahogany and eyes that held the perpetual gleam of a distant dream, it was a canvas. Her desk, scarred with generations of adolescent angst, became a battleground for her imagination, a sanctuary where the monotonous drone of multiplication tables faded into the background, while Mrs. Jenkins droned on about fractions. Ilara's pencil danced across the margins of her worn textbook, conjuring worlds that were infinitely more captivating than the one unfolding before her. Today's masterpiece, unfolding subtly beneath the shadow of a forgotten ruler, was a sprawling ecosystem of miniature winged creatures. They fluttered and soared, their tiny forms imbued with a life that existed only within Ilara's mind. One, a whimsical blend of a hummingbird and a dragonfly, zipped past a towering anthropomorphic oak tree, its bark etched with ancient, knowing eyes. Another, a plump, beetle-like being, busily gathered imaginary dewdrops on a mushroom cap. Each stroke of her pencil was deliberate, a silent act of creation in a classroom that demanded conformity. Ilara didn't doodle to rebel, she doodled to survive. The world outside her sketchbook often felt too loud, too sharp, too full of expectations she couldn't quite grasp. Her home, a modest suburban house on the quiet streets of Millwood, Connecticut, offered little solace from the internal din. Her parents, kind but preoccupied, often seemed to exist on a different plane, their conversations revolving around bills and adult anxieties that felt distant and impenetrable to Ilara's 10-year-old mind. Dinners were often quiet affairs, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery and the low hum of the refrigerator. Ilara would sit, pushing around the peas on her plate, her mind already miles away, constructing elaborate narratives for the shadows dancing on the kitchen wall. She wasn't neglected, not in any malicious sense, but rather, she felt unseen, a quiet observer in her own life. The silence at home mirrored the silence she often felt within herself, a quiet that yearned for expression. Her retreat into art was a familiar comfort, a private universe where she was the undisputed architect. Yet, this very comfort made her an easy target. Brandon Hayes, the undisputed king of the fifth-grade popularity hierarchy, with his perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a smirk that seemed permanently etched on his face, found Ilara's quiet absorption endlessly amusing. He saw her doodling not as creativity, but as a sign of weakness, a childish distraction. One particularly dull Tuesday afternoon, as Mrs. Jenkins assigned yet another page of long division, Brandon leaned back in his chair, a mischievous glint in his eyes. His deskmate, a giggling sycophant named Chloe, followed his gaze to Ilara's desk. Ilara, oblivious, was meticulously adding scales to a mythical fish. "Look at Ilara," Brandon stage whispered, loud enough for a few rows to hear. "Still playing with her little imaginary friends. Don't you ever pay attention? Ilara, or are you too busy drawing your boogers?" A ripple of snickers spread through the classroom. Ilara's head snapped up, her face flushing a deep crimson. She quickly slammed her textbook shut, hiding her nascent world from their mocking eyes. The sting of their laughter was a familiar ache, a dull throb in her chest that she had learned to endure. She wanted to disappear, to shrink until she was small enough to slip through the cracks in the floorboards. Mrs. Jenkins, engrossed in writing a complex equation on the blackboard, remained oblivious to the microdrama unfolding behind her. This was the routine Ilara retreated. Brandon mocked, and the world kept turning, uncaring. Lunchtime was no different. The school cafeteria, a cacophony of scraping chairs, shrill voices, and the clatter of plastic trays, was Ilara's personal purgatory. She always chose the same table in the far corner, near the chipped paint on the wall, where she could become a part of the background. Her lunch, usually a meticulously packed sandwich and a bruised apple, was consumed in silent haste. Today, as she unwrapped her sandwich, She watched the groups of friends huddled together, their laughter echoing through the cavernous room. Brandon and his crew occupied a central table, their boisterous conversations dominating the space. Chloe, with an exaggerated flourish, tossed her hair back, mimicking Ilara's quiet, focused posture, drawing more laughter from their clique. Ilara felt a familiar knot of loneliness tighten in her stomach. The library, a haven of quiet contemplation and the comforting scent of old paper, was her refuge. After lunch, while other kids ran wild on the playground, Ilara would slip away to the shelves, losing herself in stories of brave adventurers and fantastical lands. She didn't just read the words, she saw them, each sentence a vibrant image that played out in her mind like a meticulously crafted film. Sometimes, she would even find a quiet corner and discreetly sketch, translating the vivid landscapes from the books onto her own small canvas. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves crunched underfoot outside, Ilara was engrossed in a particularly thrilling chapter of a book about a dragon. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the small commotion near the science fiction section until a soft whimper pierced the air. A younger boy, perhaps a third grader, had tripped over an untied shoelace and fallen, sending a stack of books tumbling to the floor. Tears welled in his eyes, more from embarrassment than pain, as he struggled to gather the scattered volumes. Other children barely glanced up, too caught up in their own worlds. Ilara hesitated for a moment, the familiar pull of her own introversion urging her to stay hidden. But something in the boy's crumpled face, so utterly defeated, stirred a pang in her chest. It reminded her, subtly, of how she felt when Brandon's words hit their mark. Without thinking, she quietly slid off her chair, retrieved a stray pencil and a small scrap of paper from her pocket, and approached the boy. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. The boy, still sniffling, nodded, his eyes wide with unshed tears. Ilara knelt beside him, and with swift, confident strokes, she began to sketch on the scrap of paper. Her hands moved with an instinctive grace, a stark contrast to her usual timid demeanor. In less than a minute, a cheerful, cartoonish knight appeared on the page, helping a tiny, distressed dragon retrieve a fallen book. The knight had an absurdly large smile, and the dragon looked comically relieved. Ilara offered the drawing to the boy. "Here," she said, a small, tentative smile playing on her lips. "He helped the dragon get his book back. Maybe he can help you too." The boy's tears instantly dried. He took the drawing, his small fingers tracing the lines of the knight's shining armor. A fragile smile bloomed on his face. "Wow," he breathed, looking up at Ilara with awe. "Thank you." Ilara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling unfamiliar but deeply satisfying. It was a fleeting moment, unobserved by anyone but the boy himself, a quiet act of empathy that solidified her gentle, caring nature. She helped him pick up the remaining books, then slipped away, leaving him to marvel at his new treasure. This was her save the cat moment, a small, selfless gesture that cemented her inherent goodness, making her easy to root for. Later that week, back in the quiet sanctuary of her bedroom, Ilara was hunched over her sketchbook, a worn, spiral-bound book with a faded blue cover. The afternoon sun streamed through her window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She was working on a new character, a curious little fox with exceptionally large ears and a perpetually surprised expression. As she meticulously refined the curve of its snout, a strange sensation began to prickle at the edges of her perception. She paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. It wasn't just the lines she was seeing now. There was something else, a subtle shimmer, a faint tremor that seemed to emanate from the drawing itself. The fox, static on the page, seemed to twitch its nose, its ears subtly swiveling as if listening to an unheard sound. Its eyes, though mere dots of graphite, held a spark of life, a fleeting flicker of sentience. Ilara blinked, rubbing her eyes. "Just my imagination," she mumbled, dismissing the sensation. She was always imagining things, seeing faces in clouds, hearing whispers in the wind. This was just another trick of her overactive mind. But as she continued to draw, the sensation intensified. When she drew the fox curling its tail around its body, she could almost feel the softness of its fur, see the subtle shift of its weight as it settled. When she sketched it chasing a butterfly, the movement of its paws, the flick of its tail, the arc of its leap, it all played out in her mind with astonishing clarity. A fleeting, almost imperceptible film. It was as if the drawings, once completed, transcended their two-dimensional confines and became imbued with a fragile, ephemeral essence of life. This wasn't just imagination. This was something different, something profound. It was a silent, internal cinema, a gift she hadn't asked for and didn't understand. She saw the potential for motion, the narrative flow, in every static line. It was as if her brain was hardwired to perceive the frames of a story, even before they existed. She tried to explain it once, tentatively, to her older brother, Alex, a pragmatic teenager obsessed with video games. He had simply shrugged, engrossed in his game. Sounds like you just have a good imagination. Ilara. Cool, I guess. She never tried again. The ability felt too strange, too unique, to share with anyone else. She guarded it like a secret treasure, a whimsical, private world that was entirely her own. She didn't know what it meant, or where it came from, but it was a quiet hum beneath the surface of her ordinary life, a persistent whisper of something extraordinary. This was the seed of the mystery, the subtle planting of a unique talent that would, one day, define her. The next day in class, as Mrs. Jenkins prepared to unveil a new unit on decimals, Brandon Hayes, ever the opportunist, spotted Ilara's new sketchbook peeking out from under her desk. He had been quietly seething since the incident with the younger boy, whose awed whispers about the amazing drawing girl had reached his ears. Brandon thrived on being the center of attention, the one with all the answers, and Ilara's quiet, unassuming talent, even if unseen by most, felt like a personal affront. He couldn't stand the idea that someone else, especially someone so meek, could possess something genuinely special. During a brief moment when Mrs. Jenkins turned to erase the blackboard, Brandon stealthily reached over, snatched the sketchbook, and held it aloft. "Look what I found," he announced, his voice carrying an exaggerated air of discovery. "Ilara's secret diary. Let's see what kind of weird stuff she draws now." Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. "Give it back, Brandon," she pleaded, her voice a reedy squeak. Her face paled as a few heads turned. Curious, Brandon ignored her, flipping through the pages with a theatrical flourish. His eyes scanned the intricate drawings of the fox, the winged creatures, the fantastical landscapes. A look of derision spread across his face. "What is this nonsense?" he scoffed, holding up a page with the fox mid-leap. "It looks like a bunch of scribbles. Is this supposed to be art? My little sister draws better than this." He crumpled the page slightly. A deliberate, cruel act. Laughter, hesitant at first, then louder, erupted from his usual followers. Chloe snickered, covering her mouth with her hand. The sound felt like a physical blow to Ilara. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She hated the way they made her feel, small and insignificant, her most treasured part of herself exposed and ridiculed. "It's just childish scribbles," Brandon declared to the class, making sure his voice carried. "No wonder she never pays attention. She's too busy drawing these doodles." He emphasized the word with mocking contempt, as if it were a disease. Who cares about these silly things when there's real work to do? He tossed the sketchbook back onto Ilara's desk with a dismissive flick, as if it were contaminated. It landed with a soft thud, its pages splayed open, exposing her secret world to the harsh fluorescent lights of the classroom. Ilara quickly snatched it up, cradling it to her chest, feeling a mix of humiliation and fierce protectiveness. The crumpled page was a jagged wound in her heart. The bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. Students surged out of the classroom, eager for freedom. Ilara remained rooted to her seat, clutching her sketchbook, the echoes of Brandon's laughter still ringing in her ears. The joy she usually found in her art felt tainted, sullied by their unkindness. She watched Brandon saunter out, surrounded by his laughing entourage, feeling a profound sense of injustice. Why did they have to be so mean? Why couldn't they just leave her alone? As the last student left, Mrs. Jenkins, who had finally turned from the blackboard, noticed Ilara still sitting there, her shoulders hunched. "Ilara, is everything all right?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. Ilara merely shook her head, unable to speak, her throat tight with suppressed emotion. Mrs. Jenkins sighed, a weary sound. She knew Brandon could be a handful, but she rarely intervened in such minor squabbles, believing children should work out their own differences. Still, Ilara's distress was palpable. "Just ignore them, dear," she said, though her words offered little comfort. "Some people just don't understand unique talents. Focus on your work." Ilara nodded, though she doubted Mrs. Jenkins truly understood. She packed her bag slowly, her movements stiff, the usual anticipation of going home, of retreating into her own quiet space, was absent. The mockery felt fresh, raw. As she walked home, the vibrant colors of autumn seemed muted, the usual chirp of birds unheard. Her sketchbook, clutched tightly against her chest, felt heavy, weighted down by the invisible judgment of her peers. She passed the neighborhood park, where younger children were laughing on the swings, their carefree joy a stark contrast to her own gloom. She wanted to be like them, unburdened by self-consciousness, free to express herself without fear of ridicule. But the image of Brandon's sneering face, the word "doodles" dripping with disdain, kept replaying in her mind. When she finally reached her house, she slipped inside quietly, hoping to avoid any questions. Her mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. Ilara went straight to her room, closing the door softly behind her. She threw her backpack onto her bed, and with a heavy sigh, opened her sketchbook. The crumpled page with the leaping fox stared back at her, a silent accusation. She traced the damaged line with a trembling finger. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a part of her, a piece of her soul laid bare for their cruel amusement. For a moment, she considered throwing it all away, stuffing her sketchbooks into the darkest corner of her closet, letting her unique visions fade into oblivion. What was the point? If it only brought her pain. But then, as she gazed at the fox, a faint, familiar shimmer danced at the edges of her vision. The crumpled line seemed to soften. The fox's eyes, though drawn in simple graphite, held a fierce, unyielding spirit. It was still leaping, still vibrant, still alive despite the damage. It was as if the drawing itself was defiant, refusing to be silenced. A tiny spark, no bigger than a firefly, ignited within her. It was a flicker of stubbornness, a quiet rebellion against the crushing weight of their contempt. If they called her art doodles, then she would doodle. She would doodle until her fingers ached, until her paper ran out, until her imagination soared beyond their petty taunts. Perhaps, one day, they would see. Perhaps, one day, her silent cinema would find an audience that truly understood. The thought was a fragile comfort, but it was enough. For now, it was enough to keep the flame flickering, to keep her pencil moving, to keep her secret world alive. The day had ended with humiliation, but it had also, imperceptibly, planted the first seed of resolve. Ilara didn't know it yet, but the quiet girl who was teased for doodling was about to embark on a journey far grander than she could ever imagine. The ordinary world had tried to dim her light, but the extraordinary world within her was only just beginning to awaken. She clutched her sketchbook a little tighter, not out of fear, but out of a nascent, determined hope. The following Monday, A gust of wind, brisk and full of the promise of approaching winter, swept through the halls of Millwood Elementary. It rustled bulletin board notices, carried the distant shouts from the playground, and, unbeknownst to most, carried with it the seeds of change for Alara Vance. She arrived at school with a fresh batch of meticulously crafted doodles, her latest creations a bustling city of miniature, sentient gears, each with its own tiny personality. The sting of Brandon's mockery still lingered, but it had morphed into a dull ache, a challenge rather than a defeat. She was determined to keep her secret world alive, even if it meant doing so under the cloak of invisibility. As Alara navigated the crowded hallway, she almost collided with a cluster of students gathered around the main bulletin board. Their excited whispers piqued her curiosity. Usually, these boards were mundane affairs, filled with announcements about bake sales or parent-teacher conferences. But today, something was different. A large, brightly colored poster, adorned with whimsical swirling lines and a dynamic, abstract splash of paint, commanded attention. Young Visionaries Art Competition. Unleash your imagination. The bold headline proclaimed. Below it, in smaller, elegant script, were the details, calling all aspiring artists Millwood Elementary is proud to host its inaugural art competition. Show us your unique perspective, your creative spirit, and your vision for the future. The grand prize, written in shimmering gold letters, made Alara's breath catch in her throat. A full scholarship to the prestigious Summer Arts Immersion Program in California. A summer arts program in California. The words hung in the air, glittering with impossible promise. California. A place synonymous with sunshine, creativity, and the magic of Hollywood, a world away from the quiet, predictable streets of Millwood. For a fleeting moment, Alara allowed herself to imagine it a place where drawing wasn't a distraction but a passion, where her doodles might be celebrated instead of scorned. The thought was so audacious, so far removed from her reality, that she almost laughed. It was a dream, pure and unattainable. Suddenly, a familiar, grating voice shattered her reverie. "Well, well, well, look what we have here," Brandon Hayes sneered, pushing his way to the front of the crowd, his eyes scanning the poster with an air of entitlement. Chloe and a few other sycophants instantly gravitated towards him. An art competition. Finally. Something I can win. My digital painting of the solar system is practically professional grade already. He puffed out his chest, oblivious to the eye rolls from a few more discerning classmates. His gaze fell upon Alara, who was trying to melt into the wall, hoping to escape his notice. "Don't even think about it, Alara," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't for your little crayon scribbles. This is for real artists, with real talent. You wouldn't know a canvas from a comic book." A few of his cronies snickered, their laughter echoing the familiar sting of his words. Alara felt her cheeks burn, but a new, unfamiliar sensation began to stir within her. It wasn't just embarrassment this time, it was a simmering indignation. Brandon's dismissive tone, his absolute certainty that she was incapable, struck a raw nerve. Her crayon scribbles were her entire world, her secret language, and he was trampling all over it with his smug pronouncements. Just as Alara was about to retreat, a new voice, calm and melodic, cut through the tension. "Excuse me, children." A woman stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention without being overbearing. She had kind eyes, framed by spectacles perched on the end of her nose, and a silver-streaked bob that fell elegantly around her shoulders. She wore an artist's smock over a simple blouse, smudged with what looked like charcoal. This was Mrs. Eleanor Vance, the new art teacher, who had only joined Millwood Elementary a few weeks prior. She had recently moved from a highly regarded art institution in New York City, and her arrival had been met with a mixture of awe and intimidation by both students and staff. There was an aura of quiet wisdom about her, a sense that she saw things others missed. Mrs. Vance's gaze swept over the students, lingering for a moment on Alara's flushed face, then briefly on Brandon's self-satisfied smirk. "I see you've all discovered our exciting new competition," she said, her voice warm and encouraging. "This is an opportunity for everyone to express themselves, regardless of their previous experience. Art is about vision, not just technique." Her eyes met Alara's, and in that brief connection, Alara felt something akin to recognition, a faint glimmer of understanding. It was as if Mrs. Vance could see beyond her timid exterior, directly into the swirling kaleidoscope of her imagination. The subtle nod Mrs. Vance gave her felt like a direct invitation, a quiet challenge. Later that day, during art class, a rare respite from her academic struggles, Alara sat sketching intently. Mrs. Vance moved through the room, offering gentle guidance, her presence a comforting anchor. When she reached Alara's desk, she paused, not to critique, but to observe. Alara was drawing a complex cityscape, but instead of buildings, it was composed entirely of intricate, interconnected gears, each one turning, propelling the city forward. The city hummed with an invisible energy, a sense of constant, silent motion. Mrs. Vance didn't say anything for a long moment, simply watching. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, expecting the usual dismissal. Instead, Mrs. Vance leaned closer, her voice a soft murmur. "Tell me about this city, Alara. What makes it tick?" Alara hesitated. Then, emboldened by the teacher's genuine interest, she began to explain. It's a city of forgotten things, Mrs. Vance," she whispered, her words gaining confidence as she spoke. "Each gear is a memory, or an idea, and they all have to work together. Otherwise the city stops. I can almost see them moving. You know, like really moving." She traced the outline of a particularly large gear with her finger, her eyes alight with the unseen animation. Mrs. Vance listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When Alara finished, Mrs. Vance straightened up, a thoughtful look on her face. "Alara," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "you have a remarkable gift, not just for drawing, but for seeing the life within your creations. That's a rare and precious thing." Alara's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken about her drawings like this before, not as scribbles or doodles, but as a gift. It was a revelation. I don't know," Alara mumbled, still processing the compliment. "Brandon says they're just childish." A faint frown touched Mrs. Vance's lips. "Brandon Hayes is a young man who struggles to understand what he cannot immediately grasp," she said, her tone devoid of judgment, merely stating a fact. "His opinions are born of his own limitations, not yours. Don't let anyone else's insecurities dim your light, Alara, especially when that light is as unique as yours." She paused, then gestured towards the competition poster pinned to the corner of the classroom. "Have you considered entering the Young Visionaries competition?" Alara looked from her drawing to the poster, then back to Mrs. Vance. The thought still felt overwhelming, terrifying. I don't know if I'm good enough, and Brandon will be there." "Good enough is a perception, Alara. And as for Brandon," Mrs. Vance smiled gently, "sometimes the greatest challenge isn't the competition itself, but overcoming your own doubts. Think of it as an opportunity to show yourself what you're capable of, not just others. And perhaps," she added, her eyes twinkling, "to show someone else what true vision looks like." The words resonated deep within Alara. Mrs. Vance wasn't just encouraging her to draw. She was encouraging her to believe in her art, to stand up for it. The idea of competing against Brandon, of proving him wrong, was a powerful, simmering motivation. It wasn't about vengeance, not entirely. but about reclaiming the dignity of her passion. It was an internal battle, a quiet war waged against her own fears and the external mockery that had plagued her for so long. That evening, Ilara sat at her desk, the blank page of her fresh sketchbook staring back at her. The excitement of the young visionaries' competition buzzed within her, a strange mix of anticipation and dread. She still heard Brandon's sneering voice in her head, telling her she wasn't good enough, that her art was worthless. But then, she recalled Mrs. Vance's steady gaze, her encouraging words, the genuine awe in her voice as she spoke about Ilara's unique ability to see movement. The internal conflict raged. Her natural inclination was to retreat, to hide her art, to avoid confrontation. It was safer, quieter. But the idea of the summer arts program, a place where she could truly belong, where her artistic soul could breathe, was a siren song too compelling to ignore. It was a glimpse into a future where she wasn't just tolerated, but celebrated. And the image of Brandon's smirk, the memory of the crumpled page, fueled a nascent fire in her belly. She wouldn't let him win, not without a fight. This wasn't just a competition anymore. It was a chance to prove something. Not just to him, but to herself. She picked up her pencil, her fingers still trembling slightly. The challenge felt monumental, terrifying. What if she failed? What if her art wasn't as special as Mrs. Vance believed the fear was a cold knot in her stomach. But beneath it, a tiny ember of defiance glowed. This was her chance, perhaps her only chance, to break free from the invisible shackles of self-doubt and ridicule. This was her point of no return. Once she decided to enter, there was no going back to the quiet, invisible world she had inhabited for so long. For the next few days, Ilara became a blur of creative energy. She filled pages with concepts, sketching characters and scenes, each one infused with the subtle, unseen movement that only she could fully perceive. She drew fantastical creatures, whimsical landscapes, and characters with expressive faces that seemed to convey entire stories in a single glance. She was meticulous, patient, her passion, her sole guide. The time she spent drawing felt different now, no longer just a refuge, but an act of purposeful creation. She spent hours in the library after school, not just reading, but studying books on animation, flipping through pages of classic flipbooks, trying to decipher the secrets of bringing static images to life. She learned about early animators, about the illusion of motion created by sequential drawings. It was as if her intuitive understanding of movement was suddenly given a historical context, a lineage. She wasn't just seeing things, she was tapping into an ancient art form, an almost magical ability to breathe life into the inanimate. The library became her training ground, the hum of the air conditioning a silent symphony to her burgeoning understanding. Her parents, surprised by her sudden late-night drawing sessions, occasionally peeked into her room. "Still drawing, honey?" her mother would ask, a gentle smile on her face. "Don't stay up too late." They didn't fully understand the depth of her immersion, but they saw the quiet determination in her eyes, and they didn't object. They were simply glad to see her so engaged in something. One afternoon, Ilara was sketching a series of dynamic poses for a character, a tiny, mischievous imp, in her art class. She was so engrossed that she didn't notice Mrs. Vance observing her from behind. Ilara was rapidly flipping through the pages of her sketchbook, creating a rudimentary flipbook with her character. The imp seemed to twitch its nose, then its entire body wiggled with suppressed laughter. It was a raw, unfiltered expression of the internal cinema that constantly played in Ilara's mind. Mrs. Vance watched, a knowing smile playing on her lips. She had seen countless students with talent, but Ilara's was different. There was an innate understanding of weight, timing, and emotion in her simple lines that was truly extraordinary. It wasn't just a series of drawings. It was the foundation of animation, the raw essence of bringing a character to life. Ilara. Mrs. Vance said softly, finally breaking the silence. You truly have a gift for movement. It's as if your pencil captures the very essence of life. Alara started, almost dropping her sketchbook. Oh, Mrs. Vance, I didn't see you. Don't worry. The teacher chuckled. I wouldn't want to interrupt such a fascinating performance. She leaned over the desk, her gaze fixed on the imp. Do you realize what you're doing here? Alara, you're not just drawing pictures. You're telling stories with motion. Alara shrugged shyly. I see them moving in my head, so I try to draw what I see. That, Alara, is the heart of animation. Mrs. Vance stated, her voice filled with quiet conviction. Most artists draw a single moment. You draw a sequence of moments, each one building on the last, creating the illusion of life. That's why your drawings feel so alive. She tapped the competition poster. This competition is your stage. Alara, it's time to show the world what your doodles can truly do. The words resonated, solidifying Alara's resolve. The fear was still there, a tiny tremor in her stomach, but it was now overshadowed by a growing sense of purpose. This wasn't just about winning a scholarship, it was about validating her unique way of seeing the world, about embracing the very thing that had made her an outcast. She looked at Mrs. Vance, a glimmer of understanding in her eyes. The art teacher wasn't just a mentor. She was the first person who truly saw her, who understood the magic she held within her hands. The path ahead was daunting, fraught with uncertainty and the looming presence of Brandon Hayes. But Alara was ready. She clutched her pencil, a silent vow forming in her mind. She would compete, not just for herself, but for every quiet dreamer, every misunderstood artist, and for the whimsical living world that resided only within her imagination. The canvas awaited, and Alara, the quiet girl with the moving pictures in her head, was finally ready to step into the light. The day of the young visionary's preliminary round dawned with a nervous energy that crackled through the halls of Millwood Elementary. For Alara, the usual anxiety of school was amplified by a new, almost physical weight in her stomach. She clutched her worn sketchbook like a shield, its pages filled not with idle doodles, but with meticulously crafted sketches, each one a testament to her burgeoning determination. The art room, usually a sanctuary of quiet creativity, had been transformed into a bustling arena filled with easels, paint-splattered drop cloths, and the nervous chatter of young artists. Students were scattered throughout the room, each engrossed in their chosen medium. Canvases leaned against walls, some already vibrant with color, others still stark white, awaiting their destiny. The air hummed with the scent of turpentine and ambition. The theme for the preliminary round was dreams, a broad and evocative prompt designed to encourage personal interpretation. Alara had spent hours pondering this, her mind sifting through vivid nocturnal landscapes and fleeting, half-remembered sensations. Brandon Hayes, predictably, was already holding court by a large easel near the window, his back ramrod straight, an air of supreme confidence radiating from him. He was putting the finishing touches on a digital painting displayed on a sleek tablet, showcasing a sprawling, futuristic city bathed in neon light. It was technically proficient, precise, and entirely devoid of warmth. He had forgone traditional art supplies, opting for the modern sheen of digital media, a choice that seemed to underscore his belief in his own superiority. His usual entourage, Chloe, and a few other giggling, admiring classmates hovered around him, offering effusive praise. "It's so realistic, Brandon," Chloe gushed, her voice sickeningly sweet. "No one can beat this." Brandon shot a triumphant smirk in Alara's direction, as if to say, "This is what real art looks like. You don't stand a chance." Alara felt a familiar wave of self-doubt wash over her, a cold tendril of fear snaking around her heart. Her humble pencil sketches suddenly felt utterly insignificant next to Brandon's flashy, high-tech display. As Mrs. Eleanor Vance moved through the room, observing each student's progress. Her presence was a quiet anchor amidst the nervous energy. Her keen eyes missed nothing, and her subtle nods of encouragement offered small bursts of confidence. She approached Brandon's easel, her expression thoughtful. "An ambitious piece. Brandon," she commented, her voice even. "Very intricate. You've clearly mastered the software." Brandon preened. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance. I spent weeks on it. I wanted something that truly showcased modern artistry. No messy paints or archaic pencils for me." He cast another pointed glance at Alara, who was meticulously outlining the ethereal wings of a dream creature. Mrs. Vance merely smiled, a slight, almost imperceptible tilt of her lips. She understood the undercurrent of competition, the subtle digs and power plays among her young artists, but she also understood the deeper motivations that drove true creativity. When Mrs. Vance finally approached Alara's small, unassuming workspace, Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. She had opted for simplicity, a collection of interconnected pencil sketches, each on a separate sheet of paper, depicting a small, luminous creature evolving through various fantastical dreamscapes. Her character, a fragile, moth-like being with eyes that held ancient wisdom, journeyed through fields of glowing flora, soared through star-dusted skies, and danced with shimmering spectral figures. Each drawing was a single frame in a longer, unspoken narrative. "Alara," Mrs. Vance said softly, picking up one of the sketches, her fingers gently tracing the delicate lines of the moth's wing. "These are beautiful. Tell me about them." Alara took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. "It's a dream moth, Mrs. Vance," she explained, her gaze fixed on her drawings rather than the teacher's face. "It collects forgotten dreams and turns them into stars. And it flies. It moves." She gestured vaguely with her hand, as if trying to conjure the motion in the air. "I see it flying. Like this." She made a soft, undulating motion with her hand. Mrs. Vance's eyes lit up with a spark of recognition. She understood. She knew exactly what Alara meant by seeing it flying. "You're seeing the motion, aren't you?" she murmured, her voice filled with quiet understanding. "The sequence," Alara nodded, a flush of surprised relief warming her cheeks. Someone finally understood. "Show me," Mrs. Vance prompted gently, her eyes twinkling, hesitantly. Alara gathered her collection of sketches. She arranged them quickly, one after another, in a precise sequence. Then, with a shy glance at her teacher, she began to flip the pages with her thumb, her movements swift and fluid. The dream moth, static just moments before, flickered into life. It dipped and soared, its translucent wings beating with a mesmerizing grace, its tiny body pulsing with an internal light. It wasn't a perfect animation. Far from it. But it was undeniably alive. The illusion of movement, subtle yet distinct, played out on the small stack of papers in her hands. It was a small, quiet miracle. Mrs. Vance gasped. A soft, involuntary sound of genuine awe. Her eyes widened, a rare, unrestrained delight spreading across her face. She leaned in closer, captivated by the rudimentary animation unfolding before her. "Incredible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Alara, this is animation. Pure, unadulterated animation. You have a true animator's eye." But their quiet moment of revelation was abruptly shattered. "What is that?" A loud, derisive voice boomed from behind them. It was Brandon Hayes, of course. He had finished his digital masterpiece and, ever vigilant for any perceived threat, had noticed Mrs. Bruos Vance's intense focus on Alara's work, his curiosity, and more potently, his rising envy, had drawn him over. He stared at Alara's flickering flipbook with a look of utter contempt, a sneer twisting his lips. Chloe and his clique crowded behind him, their faces reflecting his disdain. Is she just flipping through her homework? Brandon scoffed. Seriously, Mrs. Vance. This is what you call art. A bunch of scribbled stick figures moving. It looks like something from a cave painting. He let out a loud, theatrical laugh, joined by his friends. She probably just copied it from an old cartoon, or used some cheap online generator. Ilara's face crumpled, the brief, intoxicating joy of Mrs. Vance's recognition evaporated, replaced by the familiar icy grip of humiliation. She quickly stopped flipping the pages, her hand trembling as she tried to hide the sketchbook. Mrs. Vance, however, remained calm. Her gaze, which had been so gentle with Ilara, now hardened as she turned to face Brandon. Brandon, that is enough, she said, her voice quiet but firm, carrying a steely edge that silenced his laughter. Ilara is demonstrating a profound understanding of sequential art, something many established artists strive for. What she is doing is innovative and authentic. Brandon, unused to being reprimanded, bristled. Authentic? It's primitive. My digital art is cutting edge. Hers is childish. It's not fair that you're even looking at it seriously. She probably just traced something. His voice rose, fueled by a mixture of envy and indignation that someone so quiet could possess a talent he couldn't replicate with all his technology. The competition is about vision, Brandon, not just technical prowess. Mrs. Vance countered, her eyes piercing. And Ilara's vision, as you just saw, is remarkable. The confrontation, though brief, left a palpable tension in the air. The other students, sensing the shift, looked from Ilara to Brandon, their initial snickers replaced by curious murmurs. They had heard Brandon's dismissive remarks, but seeing Mrs. Vance defend Ilara so staunchly and witnessing the raw envy on Brandon's face gave them pause. Brandon, fuming, knew he had overstepped, but his pride wouldn't let him back down completely. Fine, he huffed, still glowering at Ilara. Let's see if her vision can stand up to real art in the final round. If she even makes it. His words were a direct challenge, a thinly veiled threat. He turned on his heel and stomped back to his digital easel, his face a mask of simmering resentment. Chloe shot Ilara a venomous look before following him. Ilara felt a cold dread settle over her. She had been seen, truly seen. But at what cost? Brandon's words, his malicious intent, were clear. He wouldn't just ignore her anymore. He would actively try to undermine her. The quiet sanctuary of her art was now exposed, a target for his envy. Mrs. Vance placed a reassuring hand on Ilara's shoulder. Don't let him get to you. Ilara. His anger is a reflection of his own insecurity. He saw something truly special, something he can't replicate, and it unnerved him. She offered a warm, encouraging smile. Just keep creating. That's your best defense. Despite Mrs. Vance's words, Ilara couldn't shake the unease. Brandon's threats felt real, his anger palpable. She knew he wouldn't stop at mere words. The art room, which had briefly felt like a stage for her triumph, now felt like a battleground. She carefully put away her flipbook, its magical motion now hidden from prying eyes, guarding it more fiercely than ever. The preliminary results were announced 2 days later, posted on the same bulletin board that had started it all. Ilara's heart hammered as she pushed through the small crowd. Her eyes scanned the list, dreading to see her name absent. But there it was, near the top, Ilara Vance, and just below it, Brandon Hayes. Both had made it to the final round. Brandon, seeing her name, shot her another cold glare from across the hallway. His expression was a mixture of surprise and renewed determination. His initial contempt had morphed into something more dangerous, a focused, calculating rivalry. He couldn't dismiss her anymore, but he could certainly try to sabotage her. Later that afternoon, Ilara overheard a hushed conversation between Chloe and another girl in the restroom. "Brandon's so mad," Chloe whispered conspiratorially. "He says Alara must have cheated. He heard Mrs. Vance talking about her seeing things moving, like she has some kind of magic eyes. He thinks she's just making it up or using some weird trick to fool the teacher." "But how?" the other girl asked. "He doesn't know, but he's going to find out," Chloe replied, her voice filled with dark excitement. "He says he'll expose her if she tries anything like that in the finals. He's going to tell everyone she's a fraud." Alara's blood ran cold. Brandon wasn't just planning to compete, he was planning to discredit her. He was twisting her unique talent, her sight of movement, into something sinister, a form of cheating. The thought sent a shiver of fear down her spine. The revelation of her talent had come with an immediate, dangerous price. She was no longer just the quiet girl who doodled. She was a threat, and her opponent was already plotting her downfall. She spent the rest of the day in a haze of anxiety. Every whispered conversation seemed to be about her, every glance a judgment. She felt exposed, vulnerable. Her quiet world had been irrevocably shattered, and the path ahead seemed fraught with unseen dangers. The competition was no longer a personal challenge. It had become a public spectacle, and she, unwillingly, was at its center. When she got home, she immediately sought out her sketchbook, flipping through the pages of her dream moth, seeking comfort in its gentle flight. But even the familiar sight brought little solace. The joy of creation was now mingled with the bitter taste of fear, and the knowledge that her most precious gift was now a weapon others sought to turn against her. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Brandon would be watching her every move in the final round. He would be scrutinizing her, looking for any perceived flaw, any opportunity to expose her. The pressure was immense, far heavier than any she had ever felt. The stage for the final confrontation was set, and Alara, the quiet girl who saw movement where others saw only stillness, was about to face her ultimate test. Her journey from the obscurity of her own imagination to the spotlight of public scrutiny had begun. And there was no turning back now. The stakes had been raised, and the quiet battle for recognition had officially transformed into a full-blown confrontation. The week leading up to the young visionary's final round stretched into an eternity for Alara Vance. Each tick of the classroom clock seemed to mock her, counting down to the moment her private world would be put on public display, ripe for scrutiny and, she feared, for further humiliation. Brandon Hayes' threat echoed in her ears, a chilling promise of exposure. He had spent the days leading up to the final round subtly, yet effectively, spreading whispers. Stories circulated about Alara's unusual methods, about her magic eyes that supposedly saw things no one else could, implying she used some kind of trickery or even technology to make her drawings move. The seeds of doubt he planted were taking root, transforming curiosity into suspicion among her peers and even some of the teachers. The very thought of the final stage, the school auditorium, sent a tremor through Alara. This wasn't just any stage. It was the same auditorium where she'd often felt invisible, where assemblies felt too loud and crowded, and where Brandon had once publicly mocked her quiet nature during a talent show sign-up. It was a place of magnified attention, a symbolic arena where her greatest fears were amplified. Now, it was to be the arena for her ultimate test. Alara poured herself into her preparations, fueled by a potent cocktail of fear and defiance. She chose her subject carefully, a whimsical forest guardian, a wise old owl with wings that resembled ancient scrolls, tasked with protecting a hidden spring. She sketched tirelessly, refining every feather, every subtle shift in posture, creating a sequence that promised fluid, lifelike motion. Her sight, her uncanny ability to perceive the frames of animation, was more acute than ever. She wasn't just drawing, she was almost feeling the character breathe, twitch, and turn. But even as her art grew stronger, her confidence wavered. The weight of expectation, combined with the omnipresent shadow of Brandon's impending sabotage, pressed down on her. She felt utterly alone in this battle. Her parents, bless their hearts, offered generic encouragement, oblivious to the deeper emotional currents at play. They saw a competition. Alara saw a crucible. Mrs. Vance, however, was a quiet pillar of support. She would often linger after class, offering Alara gentle advice, not on technique, but on resilience. "Remember, Alara," she'd say, "true artists don't seek validation from others. They create because they must. Their art is their truth, and your truth, Alara, is extraordinary." But even Mrs. Vance couldn't be there every moment, couldn't shield her from the whispers or the looming confrontation. The day of the final round arrived, draped in a thin, nervous fog. Alara walked to school with a familiar knot in her stomach, but this time it was tighter, more suffocating. In her backpack, carefully wrapped in a protective cloth, was her final project, a series of oversized individual drawings, each measuring roughly 11 to 17 inches, designed to be displayed sequentially. She had debated for days whether to use her traditional flipbook method or to try something larger, more impactful, something that would truly showcase the movement she saw. Mrs. Vance had encouraged her to go big, to truly embrace the essence of her vision. So, Alara had meticulously drawn each frame, over 100 sheets of Bristol board, capturing every subtle shift of her forest guardian. It was her most ambitious project yet, a full narrative arc in sequential art. The school auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Parents, teachers, and students filled the rows, their faces a mix of curiosity and hushed excitement. A panel of judges, comprising the school principal, a local art gallery owner, and a visiting artist from a regional college, sat at a long table at the front, their expressions stern and analytical. The stage was set up with individual display areas. Brandon Hayes, of course, was already positioned at the central one, his custom-built easel proudly displaying a massive digital screen. His artwork, projected for all to see, was a hyper-realistic landscape, meticulously rendered with intricate details and vibrant colors. It was technically flawless, a testament to his digital prowess and the expensive software he had access to. He had even incorporated subtle animations, a shimmering waterfall, a flock of birds flying in the distance, all achieved through pre-rendered effects. He stood beside it, radiating an almost unbearable smugness, chatting confidently with the principal. Alara's designated area was to the side, smaller and less prominent. There was no digital screen for her, just a tall, simple display board, like a large canvas, with a few hooks to hang her drawings. The stark contrast between Brandon's high-tech display and her traditional humble setup made her feel even smaller, more vulnerable. The competition began. One by one, students presented their projects. There were beautiful paintings, intricate sculptures, and thought-provoking mixed-media pieces. Each artist received polite applause. Then came Brandon Hayes. He stepped forward, a practiced smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, judges," he began, his voice smooth and confident, "I present Digital Dreams, a vision of nature intertwined with technology." He launched into a lengthy explanation of his sophisticated techniques, the layers of software he used, and the sheer number of hours he poured into his work. His projected image shimmered with polished perfection, and the crowd murmured in appreciation. Brandon reveled in the attention, occasionally glancing at Alara with a triumphant smirk. He even made a subtle, almost imperceptible jab. While some artists prefer more traditional methods, I believe true artistry embraces the future. The implication was clear. Finally, it was Alara's turn. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that fell over the auditorium. As she walked onto the stage, past Brandon's towering digital display, she felt every eye on her. The whispers in the crowd seemed to grow louder, the accusations Brandon had sown taking root in the collective consciousness. She heard a faint, familiar snicker from Chloe in the front row. She stood before her blank display board, a solitary figure with her stack of drawings. She felt the heavy gaze of the judges, their faces unreadable. The silence was deafening, amplified by the vastness of the auditorium. It felt like an eternity. The head judge, a distinguished-looking woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, cleared her throat. "Ilara Vance," she announced, her voice precise. "You may present your artwork." Ilara's throat felt dry, her voice a reedy whisper. My piece is called The Last Spring Guardian," she managed, barely audible. "It's about a guardian owl who protects a magical spring, and how it moves through the forest." She knew her explanation sounded weak, insufficient. The narrative wasn't in the words. It was in the motion, in the unseen life. "And how do you plan to show us this movement?" the local art gallery owner, a man known for his skepticism, asked, his voice laced with polite but palpable doubt. "We've heard some interesting rumors about your presentation methods, young lady." His eyes narrowed slightly. A direct challenge. This was it. The moment of truth. Brandon's campaign of whispers had worked. The pressure was immense. Ilara felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She looked at the blank board, then at the judging panel, then at the sea of faces in the audience, each one seeming to scrutinize her, to doubt her. Brandon's triumphant smirk from the side of the stage was almost unbearable. He seemed to relish her discomfort, confident in her imminent failure. She was utterly alone. There was no one to help her, no one to offer a quick save, no one to defend her from the rising tide of skepticism. This was her battle, and she had to face it herself. A fleeting image of the crumple in her sketchbook, a memory of Brandon's mocking face, flashed through her mind. And then, Mrs. Vance's words echoed, "Don't let anyone else's insecurities dim your light." Ilara, a quiet resolve settled within her. This wasn't just about winning a prize anymore. This was about proving them wrong, about defending her art, about validating the unique world she carried within her. She took a deep, shaky breath, her gaze hardening with determination. She lifted the first drawing. "My art? It moves," Ilara declared, her voice still trembling but gaining a fragile strength. "It moves because I can see it move." The words hung in the air, audacious and almost unbelievable. "And I'm going to show you." She began to methodically, yet quickly, pin her drawings onto the large display board, one by one, each sheet perfectly aligned with the last, creating a long, continuous strip of images. The silence in the auditorium was absolute, punctuated only by the soft click of each pin. Ilara's movements were precise, focused, her hands working almost automatically, guided by an instinct deeper than conscious thought. The clock on the back wall, usually a comfort, now loomed large, its minute hand ticking inexorably forward. She had only 15 minutes to complete her display and perform her magic. The sheer volume of drawings meant every second counted. She worked with a focused intensity, oblivious to the stares, to the murmurs that started to ripple through the audience. Her hair fell across her face as she bent over her work, her brow furrowed in concentration. Brandon watched, his smirk gradually fading as he saw the sheer number of drawings Ilara was meticulously putting up. He had expected a simple, small flipbook, something easily dismissed. But this was an undertaking, a massive display of sequential art, a flicker of genuine concern, quickly masked by annoyance, crossed his face. He leaned closer to Chloe, whispering furiously, trying to understand what Ilara was doing. The visiting artist on the judging panel, a woman with a keen eye for abstract form, leaned forward, a curious expression on her face. She had dismissed the rumors about Ilara, but the sheer methodical nature of her display was beginning to intrigue her. Ilara ignored them all. Her world had shrunk to the expanse of the display board, the hundreds of drawings, and the ever-present hum of movement in her mind. Her fingers moved faster, a blur of motion as she pinned the final drawing into place. She stepped back, a single bead of sweat trickling down her temple. She was done. The entire length of the display board was now covered in her individual drawings, a sprawling, silent narrative of the forest guardian. She turned to face the audience, her chest heaving slightly. 15 minutes. She had barely made it. Now came the true test. She looked directly at the head judge, her eyes shining with a fragile defiance. "It moves," she repeated, her voice clearer now, stronger. "Watch." She raised her hands, and then, with a confident, almost theatrical flourish, she began to move them quickly across the long strip of drawings, using her fingers to lightly brush and blur the images, creating the illusion of a continuous flow. It was like a giant, live-action flipbook. And then, the magic happened. The static drawings on the board shimmered, wavered, and then coalesced into a fluid, graceful motion. The forest guardian, the wise old owl, began to fly across the board, its ancient, scroll-like wings beating with ethereal grace. It soared through invisible trees, its head swiveling, its eyes blinking with profound wisdom. It dipped and glided, its movements imbued with a palpable sense of life and purpose. A single tear, shining like a gem, trickled from its eye as it reached the hidden spring, its presence emanating a quiet, ancient power. The scene was simple, yet profoundly moving. A silent film playing out on the large board. A collective gasp swept through the auditorium. The low murmurs ceased. Absolute silence descended, broken only by the frantic beat of Alara's heart. Faces in the audience, which had moments ago held skepticism and indifference, were now transformed. Jaws dropped, eyes widened in disbelief, then in wonder. Brandon Hayes, from the side of the stage, stood frozen. His confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of utter astonishment, then dawning horror. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he was seeing things. But the owl continued its silent, graceful flight across the board, undeniably alive. He had never seen anything like it. His carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbled, revealing the raw, ugly envy beneath. The judges, initially poised to deliver their skeptical questions, were stunned into silence. The art gallery owner leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Alara's moving masterpiece, a look of profound amazement on his face. The principal blinked, then a slow, awestruck smile spread across his features. The visiting artist, tears welling in her eyes, simply whispered, "Genius." The silent flight of the owl continued for a few more moments. Then Alara slowly withdrew her hands. The image froze, the owl returning to its static, drawn form. Yet the powerful impression of its movement lingered in the air. An afterimage burned into the collective mind of the audience. For a long, breathtaking moment, there was complete silence. No one moved. No one spoke. The spell had been cast, and the audience was captivated. Then, a single clap echoed through the vast auditorium. It came from Mrs. Eleanor Vance, sitting quietly in the back row, a proud, almost tearful smile gracing her lips. Her applause was hesitant at first, then quickly, miraculously, it spread. One clap became two, then a ripple, then a wave. Soon, the entire auditorium erupted in a thunderous, prolonged standing ovation. It wasn't just polite applause. It was a roaring, spontaneous outpouring of awe and admiration. Children cheered, parents whistled, and teachers pounded on their seats. Alara stood on stage, tears streaming down her face, not of sadness or fear, but of overwhelming relief and disbelief. The warmth of their applause washed over her, a healing balm to years of ridicule and self-doubt. She looked at the faces in the crowd, no longer seeing scorn, but wonder, recognition, and genuine appreciation. Their expressions were a kaleidoscope of emotions from skepticism to awe, from doubt to profound admiration. It was vindication, pure and undeniable. The quiet girl who doodled had not just competed, she had triumphed, turning her unique secret into a public, undeniable miracle. The roar of applause that erupted in the Millwood Elementary auditorium was unlike anything Alara Vance had ever experienced. It wasn't the polite clapping reserved for school assemblies, but a visceral, overwhelming torrent of sound that washed over her, a physical manifestation of awe and release. It vibrated through the floorboards, echoed off the high ceilings, and resonated deep within her very bones. Alara stood there, bathed in the blinding stage lights, tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving with a mixture of disbelief and an almost unbearable sense of relief. For years, her art had been her quiet refuge, a secret world understood by no one. Now, it had exploded onto a public stage, seen and appreciated by hundreds. The sheer magnitude of the moment threatened to overwhelm her. She looked out at the faces in the audience, no longer seeing a sea of judgment, but a kaleidoscope of human emotion. Parents were on their feet, some wiping tears from their own eyes. Students, who just moments before had been whispering with doubt, were now cheering, their faces alight with genuine wonder. Even some of the teachers, usually stoic and reserved, were clapping with unrestrained enthusiasm, their expressions a testament to the unexpected magic they had just witnessed. The loudest, most heartfelt applause came from the back row, where Mrs. Eleanor Vance stood, her face radiant with a triumphant smile. Her eyes met Alara's, and in that silent exchange, Alara felt a profound connection, a shared understanding that transcended words. Mrs. Vance had seen it, truly seen it, all along. She had believed when no one else did, and that belief had been Alara's anchor. Then, Alara's gaze drifted to the side of the stage, where Brandon Hayes stood. His jaw was slack, his usually smug face pale and contorted with a mixture of shock, fury, and a dawning, terrible realization. His digital masterpiece, so vibrant and technically perfect moments ago, now seemed flat, lifeless, utterly devoid of the soul that Alara's doodles possessed. He tried to force a sneer, to summon his usual air of superiority, but his expression merely twisted into something akin to impotent rage. He had tried to expose her, to discredit her, and instead, he had unwittingly propelled her into the spotlight, making her triumph all the more spectacular. His carefully constructed world of artistic dominance had just been obliterated by a quiet girl and her pencils. He looked away abruptly, unable to meet her eye, his defeat palpable. The head judge, a formidable woman named Ms. Albright, finally rose from her seat, her stern features softened by a look of profound admiration. She held up a hand, and slowly, the thunderous applause began to subside, though a persistent hum of excitement still lingered in the air. "Alara Vance," Ms. Albright announced, her voice filled with a rare, almost reverent tone. "In my many years of judging art competitions, I have never witnessed such an extraordinary display of talent and vision. You didn't just show us a series of drawings. You made us believe in magic. You breathed life into static images in a way that is truly unprecedented for someone your age." She paused, her eyes sweeping over the other judges, who nodded in emphatic agreement. "The judges have conferred, and our decision is unanimous." She picked up a gleaming, gold-plated trophy. The winner of the inaugural Young Visionaries Art Competition and recipient of the full scholarship to the Summer Arts Immersion Program in California is Alara Vance. A fresh wave of cheers erupted, even louder than before. Alara felt a surge of exhilaration, a giddy lightness that made her almost float. She had won. She had actually won. The scholarship, the dream of California, was real. As she made her way to the front of the stage to accept the award, her legs felt like jelly, but her head was held high. The local art gallery owner, Mr. Henderson, whose initial skepticism had been so apparent, now rushed forward, his face beaming. "Young lady," he exclaimed, shaking her hand vigorously, "you are an absolute marvel what you did up there. It's pure genius. Have you ever considered exhibiting your work? I'd be honored to feature your sequential pieces in my gallery." The visiting artist from the regional college, Dr. Anya Sharma, approached with a look of intense curiosity and respect. "Ilara," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "Your understanding of animation principles is astounding. The weight, the timing, the emotional arc you conveyed with just pencil and paper. It's something we teach at the university level. You have an innate talent that cannot be taught. I would personally love to invite you to our special summer workshops for gifted young artists. It's an advanced program, beyond the regular camp." Ilara stammered her thanks, overwhelmed by the sudden deluge of praise and opportunity. It was a whirlwind of recognition, a stark contrast to the years of being unseen. The universe, it seemed, was finally tilting in her favor. Amidst the joyful chaos, a commotion broke out near the judge's table. Brandon Hayes, his face a mask of scarlet fury, suddenly marched forward, his voice loud and accusatory. "This is a fix. It's not fair. Her art isn't real. She probably had some kind of projector hidden, or some kind of trick. She's a cheat." His words, born of desperation and humiliation, cut through the joyous atmosphere like a rusty knife. A hush fell over the crowd. The principal, Mr. Davies, stepped forward, his expression stern. "Brandon, that is quite enough. Your accusations are unfounded and inappropriate." "Unfounded," Brandon scoffed, pointing a trembling finger at Ilara. She just waved her hands. "My art took weeks of hard work with professional software. Hers is just doodles. She probably traced something or copied it. She can't just make drawings move." His voice cracked with frustration, revealing the raw, unadulterated envy that fueled his outburst. He felt his carefully crafted image of superiority crumbling around him, and he lashed out. "Actually, Brandon—" "Mrs." Vance interjected, stepping forward, her voice calm and authoritative. "Ilara uses no external aids or projectors. What you witnessed was a demonstration of her extraordinary, innate ability to visualize and render movement in sequential frames. It's a classic animation technique, elevated by her unique talent. It's not cheating. It's pure artistry." She looked directly at Brandon, her gaze unwavering. "And while your digital piece was technically impressive, Brandon, it lacked the soul, the genuine spark of life that Ilara's work possesses. Art is about connection, not just perfection." Mr. Davies then produced a printed sheet. "Furthermore," he added, his voice firm, "we have received reports that Brandon Hayes attempted to discredit another competitor by spreading false rumors about cheating and tricks. Such behavior is unacceptable and goes against the spirit of this competition." He paused, his gaze fixed on Brandon. "And it has come to our attention that a significant portion of your digital masterpiece incorporated pre-made assets and copyrighted material from commercial software, which you presented as your own original creations. While using such tools is permitted, representing them as entirely your own original work, without proper attribution, is a serious breach of artistic integrity." Brandon's face turned from red to an ashen gray. He spluttered, unable to form a coherent defense. His carefully constructed lie, his meticulously crafted image, shattered into a million pieces. The collective gaze of the audience, which had moments ago been filled with awe for Ilara, now turned to him, filled with disappointment and disdain. "As a consequence," Mr. Davies concluded, his voice unwavering, "Brandon Hayes, you are hereby disqualified from this competition. Your prize money from the preliminary round, if any, will be forfeited, and you will be assigned community service within the school for the remainder of the semester." Brandon stood there, utterly defeated. The auditorium, which had been buzzing with Ilara's triumph, now fell silent as his downfall unfolded before everyone's eyes. He looked from Mr. Davies to Ilara, then to the floor, unable to meet anyone's gaze. His friends, Chloe included, slowly backed away, their faces betraying their embarrassment and desire to distance themselves from his public disgrace. The boy who had once commanded popularity and respect now stood utterly alone, his arrogance stripped bare. He mumbled a barely audible apology to Alara, his voice thick with humiliation, before slinking off the stage. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Justice, swift and undeniable, had been served. Alara watched him go, feeling no malice, only a quiet sense of closure. The long shadow he had cast over her life for so long had finally lifted. The celebration continued. Alara was enveloped in hugs from Mrs. Vance, who beamed with maternal pride. Her parents rushed forward, their eyes shining with happy tears, finally understanding the depth of their daughter's talent and the journey she had quietly undertaken. The local news channel, alerted by the unusual buzz, arrived with cameras, eager to capture the story of the Millwood marvel. Later that evening, after the adrenaline had subsided and the house had returned to its usual quiet hum, Alara sat with Mrs. Vance in her art classroom. The award ceremony had concluded, and the school was almost empty, bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of triumph. "You were magnificent today, Alara," Mrs. Vance said, her voice soft and warm. She had brewed 2 cups of herbal tea, and the quiet ritual was a comforting counterpoint to the day's excitement. Alara smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mrs. Vance. You saw something in me that no one else did. Even I didn't truly understand it." Mrs. Vance nodded. "You have a unique perception, Alara. Most people see a moment in time, a still frame. You see the continuum, the flow, the story between the frames. That's a gift. It's not just about drawing. It's about empathy, about understanding the essence of movement and emotion. That's why your owl resonated so deeply with everyone." She paused, stirring her tea. "You made something static alive. You truly are a visionary." Alara looked down at her hands, then back at Mrs. Vance. "I still don't fully understand it," she admitted. "This, seeing things move, is it normal?" Mrs. Vance chuckled gently. "Normal is overrated, Alara. What you have is far more valuable than normal. It's the ability to connect with the world on a deeper level, to translate the unseen into the seen, embrace it, cultivate it. That's what the Summer Arts Immersion Program will help you do. It will give you the tools, the knowledge, and the community to truly explore and master your unique gift." A feeling of profound peace settled over Alara. The validation she had craved, the acceptance she had longed for, had arrived. Not in a loud, boastful manner, but through the undeniable power of her art. She had faced her fears, confronted her tormentor, and emerged victorious. The doodles that had once brought her shame now held the promise of an extraordinary future. The quiet girl who saw pictures move was finally ready to step into a world where that sight wasn't just understood, but celebrated. The stage had been set for her future, and it was boundless. The aftermath of the Young Visionaries competition rippled through Millwood Elementary like a gentle, cleansing wave. The air, once thick with whispers and the subtle tension of unspoken rivalries, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of quiet respect and budding admiration for Alara Vance. Her victory wasn't just a personal triumph, it was a testament to the power of overlooked talent, a quiet revolution against the flash and bluster that had dominated the school's social landscape. For Brandon Hayes, the fall from grace was swift and absolute. His public outburst and the subsequent revelation of his artistic dishonesty had stripped away his carefully constructed facade. The boy who once commanded attention and admiration now found himself an outcast, his usual entourage having scattered like startled birds. Chloe, his most ardent sycophant, had swiftly shifted her allegiance, now attempting to gravitate towards more promising social orbits, though her attempts were met with subtle disdain. Brandon's once confident swagger was replaced by a sullen slouch. He avoided eye contact, his face often flushed with shame when he encountered Alara in the hallways. His punishment for violating the competition rules and for his unsportsmanlike conduct was not merely symbolic. Mr. Davies, the principal, a man who valued integrity above all else, ensured that Brandon's atonement was both visible and meaningful. Brandon was assigned daily community service, not just menial tasks, but duties that forced him to confront his actions. He spent his afternoons after school organizing the art supply closet, a space he had once disdained. He also assisted Mrs. Vance in preparing materials for art classes, a bitter irony given his disdain for traditional art. During these tasks, he was often silent, his former bravado replaced by a simmering resentment that slowly, imperceptibly, began to morph into something akin to quiet contemplation. The bright, digital screen of his tablet lay forgotten in his locker. He was forced to interact with the raw materials of creation, charcoal dust on his hands, the faint scent of paint on his clothes, things he had deemed beneath him. One particularly dreary afternoon, a week after the competition, Alara found herself in the school library, surrounded by her beloved animation books. She was sketching new character concepts for the summer program, her mind already buzzing with ideas. Brandon, finishing his assigned task of shelving, returned books, entered the library. He saw Alara, hunched over her sketchbook, completely absorbed. He hesitated. Then, mustering an ounce of his former audacity, he approached her table. Alara looked up, startled, her pencil freezing mid-stroke. Her heart gave a little lurch. She hadn't spoken to Brandon since his public apology on stage, which had been mumbled and clearly reluctant. "Hey, Vance," Brandon said, his voice surprisingly subdued, lacking its usual aggressive edge. He shuffled his feet, avoiding her gaze. "Listen, about what happened." He cleared his throat, clearly struggling with the words. I was out of line, all those rumors, and saying your art wasn't real. That was wrong and stupid." He finally met her eyes, and in their depths, Alara saw not just embarrassment, but a flicker of genuine remorse. I was mad you were so good. And I didn't get it, and I thought if I could make you look bad, I'd look better." He shrugged, a gesture of defeat. "It didn't work. You're really good." Alara. "Seriously. That owl. It was amazing." Alara stared at him, surprised by the raw honesty in his voice. She had expected more bluster, more deflection. This was a different Brandon. "Thank you, Brandon," she said softly. "Genuinely. It means a lot for you to say that." He nodded, still looking uncomfortable. "Yeah. Anyway, just wanted to clear the air. Good luck with California." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Alara to process the unexpected apology. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a concrete step towards genuine remorse, a stark contrast to his earlier public humiliation. The misunderstood bully was finally beginning to understand. Meanwhile, Alara's world was rapidly expanding. The news of her victory and unique talent spread far beyond Millwood Elementary. A small article in the local newspaper, titled "Millwood's Moving Masterpiece," featured a grainy photo of Alara standing proudly beside her display board. The story highlighted her journey from being teased for doodles to becoming a legendary animator in the making. Mrs. Vance was quoted extensively, singing praises of Alara's inherent ability to see beyond the static. The calls started coming in, not just from local art enthusiasts, but from prestigious art schools, and even some niche animation studios interested in her unconventional approach. Dr. Anya Sharma, the visiting artist judge, had been true to her word. A formal invitation arrived for Alara to attend a special pre-college summer workshop at the regional college's School of Animation, an intensive program designed for exceptionally gifted high school students, far more advanced than the general arts immersion program she had initially won. This new opportunity, more rigorous and specialized, was a direct consequence of her extraordinary display. It offered access to professional animators, cutting-edge software, and advanced techniques, pushing her beyond the elementary school curriculum. Ilara chose the advanced workshop, a decision that filled her with both excitement and a healthy dose of trepidation. It was a challenging leap, a direct plunge into the world of professional animation, but the fear was overshadowed by an undeniable sense of purpose. This was her path, clear and brightly lit. As the school year drew to a close, Ilara spent her last few days at Millwood Elementary in quiet reflection. The art room, once a place where she had felt the sting of her uniqueness, now felt like a hallowed ground, the birthplace of her rediscovered passion. On her final day, after her last class, she sought out Mrs. Eleanor Vance. The art room was quiet, sunlight streaming through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Mrs. Vance was packing away supplies, humming softly to herself. "Mrs. Vance," Ilara's voice was soft. The teacher turned, a warm smile on her face. "Ilara, I was hoping you'd stop by, ready for your grand adventure." Ilara nodded, a mixture of nerves and excitement bubbling within her. "More ready than I thought I'd be. I wanted to thank you. For everything. For seeing me. For believing in me." Her voice was thick with emotion. "You changed everything." Mrs. Vance walked over and gently placed a hand on Ilara's shoulder. "Ilara, I didn't change anything. I merely held up a mirror so you could see the extraordinary light that was already within you. You had the talent, the vision, the courage to share it. That was all you." She smiled. "My job was simply to provide the space, the encouragement, and sometimes a little push." They sat together on a paint-splattered stool and a worn armchair, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. They talked about the competition, about Brandon's surprising apology, and about the exciting, daunting prospect of the summer animation workshop. "You know," Mrs. Vance mused, gazing out the window, "the world often tries to put people in boxes, to tell you what you can and cannot do, to dismiss what they don't understand. Your doodles, as Brandon called them, were a radical act of self-expression. They were your defiance, and that defiance, combined with your unique gift, will take you far." "I used to think my ability to see things move was weird," Ilara confessed, a small, tentative smile on her face. "Like I was imagining too much." "No," Mrs. Vance said firmly, shaking her head. "You weren't imagining too much. You were seeing more. That's the animator's gift. Ilara, it's the ability to perceive the subtle nuances of life, to break down complex actions into simple moments, and then to reassemble them, breathing life back into them. You don't just draw what is, you draw what could be, what will be." She picked up one of Ilara's early sketches, a simple drawing of a bird mid-flight. "You didn't just capture a bird, you captured its journey. That's why your art resonates." Ilara felt a profound sense of understanding settle over her. It wasn't just a quirky brain trick. It was a legitimate, powerful way of seeing the world. A lens through which she could translate the dynamism of life onto paper. It was her superpower, finally understood and embraced. The conversation was a quiet resolution, a soothing balm that solidified her understanding of her own place in the world. She was no longer an outsider. She was a pioneer. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the art room in hues of orange and purple, Ilara stood up, feeling a lightness she hadn't known was possible. The weight of self-doubt, of social anxiety, of fear of judgment, all of it had lifted. She was still Ilara Vance, the quiet girl who loved to draw. But now she was also Ilara Vance, the budding animator, the visionary. She hugged Mrs. Vance tightly. "Thank you again," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. "Go create wonders, Ilara." Mrs. Vance replied, returning the hug. "The world is waiting to see what your hands, and your unique eyes, can bring to life." Ilara walked out of Millwood Elementary for the last time as a student. not with the usual hurried escape, but with a serene sense of purpose. The school building, which had once felt like a prison of conformity, now felt like a launching pad. The streetlights flickered on, illuminating the familiar path home, but Alara's gaze was already fixed on the distant horizon, on the sun-drenched possibilities of California, and the vibrant, moving worlds waiting to be brought to life by her unique touch. The journey had ended its first chapter, a painful but ultimately triumphant one, and the next, far grander adventure was about to begin. Her quiet rebellion had transformed into a roaring affirmation of self. 15 years later, the vibrant hum of the Pixar Animation Studios campus in Emeryville, California, was a symphony Alara Vance had come to love. The sprawling complex, a labyrinth of creative energy, always felt alive, thrumming with the quiet excitement of innovation and storytelling. Her office, nestled within a wing dedicated to character animation, was a testament to a journey that had begun with humble pencil doodles and silent dreams. Stacks of sketchbooks, some worn and tattered from years of use, lay piled on her desk alongside sleek digital tablets. Character maquettes, from whimsical aliens to expressive robots, lined her shelves, each a tangible piece of a world she had helped bring to life. On a prominent spot sat her most prized possession, a small, gold-plated trophy from a long-forgotten elementary school art competition. Its inscription faded, but its meaning undimmed. Alara Vance, now in her mid-20s, was no longer the timid girl who retreated into her imagination. She was a senior animator and animation director, a force of nature in the industry, renowned for her uncanny ability to infuse characters with a depth of emotion and a fluidity of movement that felt almost magical. Her name was synonymous with some of Pixar's most beloved films, her unique touch visible in the expressive eyes of a lost robot, the joyful bounce of a mischievous monster, and the poignant waltz of forgotten emotions. She had directed animation sequences that had brought audiences to tears and to uproarious laughter across the globe. Her inherent sight, her ability to perceive the subtle nuances of motion and story within every gesture, had not just been understood, but was now her most valuable asset, a finely honed tool she wielded with masterful precision. The accolades had piled up industry awards, critical acclaim, and the quiet reverence of her peers. Yet, for Alara, the true measure of her success wasn't in the trophies or the box office numbers. It was in the transformative power of her art. She had turned the very thing she was once teased for into her life's calling, transforming ridicule into renown, and self-doubt into boundless creativity. She had learned that true strength lay not in conformity, but in embracing one's unique way of seeing the world. Despite her demanding schedule, Alara remained deeply connected to her roots. She remembered the quiet loneliness of her childhood, the sting of being misunderstood, and the profound impact of someone believing in her. This memory fueled a powerful desire to give back. A few years prior, she had established the Millwood Dreams Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to nurturing young artistic talent in underserved communities, particularly focusing on children who felt overlooked or struggled to find their voice. The foundation provided art supplies, mentorship, and scholarships to summer arts programs, echoing the very opportunity that had changed her own life. She often made annual trips back to Millwood, Connecticut, not as a celebrity, but as a mentor. She would visit Millwood Elementary, her old school, and spend hours in the art room, which still smelled faintly of paint and possibility. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, now retired but still sharp and vibrant, would always be there, her eyes shining with pride. Alara would share her story, not to boast, but to inspire. She'd talk about the power of perseverance, the importance of embracing one's quirks, and how the doodles that once felt like a burden could become the very wings that carried them to their dreams. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alara found herself standing on a brightly lit stage in a packed auditorium, not at Pixar, but at a prestigious TED Talk conference in San Francisco. The audience, a sea of curious and influential minds, eagerly awaited her presentation. The topic, the art of seeing movement from doodles to depth. She began her talk by sharing a faded, enlarged photograph of her crumpled dream moth drawing from the elementary school competition, the one Brandon Hayes had scorned. The image, projected onto a massive screen behind her, instantly captured the audience's attention. She recounted her childhood, the teasing, the feeling of being an outsider, and the quiet internal world of moving pictures that had sustained her. Her voice, once timid, now resonated with confidence and an almost poetic clarity. For years, Alara explained, her gaze sweeping across the rapt faces in the audience, I thought my ability to see movement in static images was strange, a quirky imagination. I was told my art was just doodles. But what I learned, through the kindness of a remarkable teacher and the crucible of public scrutiny, was that those doodles were my superpower. They were my unique lens on the world, a way to perceive the subtle dance of life that most people miss. She then shared a deeply personal anecdote about the solace her drawings provided during lonely times, and how the simple act of putting pencil to paper became her anchor. Every line, she said, her voice filled with quiet passion, was a breath, every stroke, a heartbeat. I wasn't just drawing, I was listening. I was trying to capture the soul of what I saw, to translate the unseen rhythm of existence. The screen behind her then shifted, displaying short, mesmerizing clips from her early, rudimentary flipbooks, the simple imp wiggling, the forest guardian owl taking flight. These were followed by breathtaking excerpts from some of her most acclaimed Pixar films, showcasing characters animated with an incredible emotional range and lifelike fluidity. The progression was astonishing, a visual journey from simple sketches to cinematic masterpieces. The magic of animation, Ilara continued, isn't in the fancy software or the endless pixels. It's in the animator's heart, in their ability to empathize, to observe, to understand the essence of movement and emotion. It's about taking a feeling, an idea, a character, and breathing life into it, one frame at a time, until it dances across the screen and into the hearts of millions. As her talk neared its conclusion, Alara picked up a simple piece of white Bristol board and a black marker, reminiscent of her elementary school days. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly, focusing a spotlight on her. The large screen behind her now displayed only a blank white space. Today, she said, her voice soft but powerful, I want to share with you a piece of that magic, the way it began. With swift, confident strokes, she began to draw a familiar figure on the Bristol board, a small, whimsical character, its large, curious eyes sparkling with unseen mischief. It was the very same character, an early iteration of one of her most beloved creations, that had sparked her imagination as a child. She drew a series of interconnected poses, each one capturing a fleeting moment of expression, a subtle shift in posture. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Alara's hand moved with practiced grace, the marker gliding across the surface. She completed the final sketch, then looked up at the camera operator, who focused in on her hands. And now, she murmured, a gentle smile playing on her lips, watch closely. With a flourish that was both practiced and profoundly instinctive, Ilara began to move her hands rapidly over the sequence of drawings, mirroring the technique she had used all those years ago on the school stage. The character, rendered in simple black lines, shimmered, and then, impossibly, it came alive on the large screen behind her. It winked, it spun, it blew a tiny, playful kiss to the audience, its movements utterly charming, imbued with a palpable personality. The magic was as potent as ever, a silent, living tableau brought forth by the simplest of means. A collective gasp, followed by a ripple of delighted laughter and then thunderous applause, swept through the auditorium. It was the sound of wonder, of children and adults alike rediscovering the joy of pure imagination. Ilara stood there, basking in the warmth of their admiration, a profound sense of fulfillment washing over her. She had not only found her voice, but had also shown countless others the power of their own unique visions. The girl who was teased for doodling had indeed grown up to be a legendary animator, But more importantly, she had become a beacon of inspiration, a living testament to the truth that the most extraordinary journeys often begin with the most ordinary and often misunderstood dreams. Her art, her life, was a continuous loop of motion, endlessly evolving, endlessly inspiring. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path, even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.